Your Honor, my father can't take care of himself anymore. He needs the court's protection.
Mr. Hayes, do you understand why this hearing has been brought before the court today?
Yes, Your Honor, and before this hearing continues, I'd like the court to hear something my sons never expected anyone to hear.
My name is Richard Blackwood, and until 3 weeks ago, I believed I knew exactly who my family was. I spent over 40 years building a construction company from nothing. Every late night, every missed vacation, every dollar I earned was for one reason: my 2 sons. When my wife passed away 5 years ago, they became my entire world. I trusted them more than I trusted myself. I even transferred most of my company shares to them because I believed family would always protect family. I couldn't have been more wrong. The morning I walked into that courtroom, I wasn't there to defend a crime. I was there to prove that I wasn't insane. My own sons had filed legal documents asking the court to declare me mentally incompetent. According to them, I was confused, unstable, and no longer capable of making decisions. If the judge believed them, I would lose everything: my home, my company, my bank accounts, even the right to control my own life. I looked across the courtroom. Both of my sons were sitting beside their expensive attorney. They wouldn't even look me in the eyes. Instead, they smiled, not the smile of worried sons, the smile of men who believed they had already won. At that moment, I realized something that shattered my heart. They weren't trying to protect me. They were trying to erase me, and they had spent months planning it. But they made one mistake, a mistake so devastating that before the day was over, the entire courtroom would turn against them. The judge adjusted her glasses and looked down at the file in front of her. "Mr. Blackwood," she said calmly, "your sons have submitted medical evaluations, financial records, and sworn statements. They believe you are no longer capable of managing your affairs." The words echoed through the courtroom. I slowly turned toward my sons. Daniel kept his eyes on the table, but Michael actually smiled. That smile hurt more than anything else. I remembered teaching him how to ride a bicycle. I remembered carrying him on my shoulders after his Little League games. I remembered promising his mother that no matter what happened, I'd always take care of our boys. Now those same boys were asking a stranger to take control of my life. Their attorney stood confidently. "Your Honor, this is a heartbreaking situation. My clients love their father. They're only asking the court to protect him from making dangerous financial decisions." Protect me? I almost laughed. 6 months earlier, I had discovered nearly $2 million missing from the company. Money had quietly disappeared through fake invoices and shell companies. When I confronted my sons, they didn't apologize. Instead, they began telling friends, employees, even relatives, that I had become forgetful, that I was imagining things. That old age had finally caught up with me. At first, no one believed them, but lies repeated often enough start sounding like the truth, and that's exactly what they wanted. By the time they filed this case, half the people around me believed I had lost my mind. They thought they had created the perfect plan. What they didn't know was that the day I discovered the missing money, I started preparing for this exact moment. It all started on a cold Monday morning. I was reviewing our quarterly financial reports when one number caught my attention: a payment for $487,000. The company name meant nothing to me. I asked our accounting manager where the money had gone. She looked confused, then nervous. Finally, she whispered, "Mr. Blackwood, your sons approved those payments personally." I didn't say a word. I simply took the files home. That night, I spent 6 straight hours going through every transaction. The deeper I looked, the worse it became. It wasn't one payment. It wasn't 10. Over the previous 18 months, more than $2 million had quietly disappeared. Fake consulting fees, companies that existed only on paper. Luxury purchases hidden inside business expenses. Someone was stealing from the company I had spent 40 years building. The next morning, I called both of my sons into my office. I placed the financial records on the desk. Then I asked one simple question. Tell me the truth. The room went completely silent. Daniel avoided eye contact. Michael leaned back in his chair and smiled, not because he had an explanation, because he believed I couldn't prove anything. Then he looked me straight in the eyes and said something I'll never forget. Dad, maybe you're just confused. For a moment, I couldn't believe what I had just heard. Confused? I had built a multi-million-dollar company from nothing. I knew every dollar that entered and left that business. But in that single moment, I realized this wasn't just about stolen money anymore. My own sons were laying the foundation for something far more dangerous, and I had no idea how far they were willing to go. I didn't argue with them. I didn't raise my voice. I simply nodded, closed the file, and walked out of my own office. From that moment on, I stopped acting like their father. I started thinking like a businessman. If my sons were willing to accuse me of losing my mind, I needed proof, real proof, not opinions, not emotions, evidence. The very next day, I hired a private forensic accountant. I didn't tell anyone, not my lawyer, not my friends, not even my sister. For 3 weeks, we quietly traced every dollar, every transfer, every fake company, every signature, and then we found something even worse than stolen money, a series of emails. They weren't discussing the business. They were discussing me. One email from Daniel read, "Once the court appoints us as guardians, Dad won't be able to touch the company anymore." Michael replied only 2 minutes later, "Good. After that, we can sell the lake house and transfer the remaining assets before he realizes what's happening." I read those messages over and over again. My hands were shaking, not because of the money, because I finally understood the truth. My sons weren't trying to save me. They were planning my future, as if I were already gone. That night, I sat alone in my late wife's favorite chair. I looked at her photograph and asked a question I never thought I'd ask. Where did we go wrong? But the silence gave me no answers, only one decision. If my own children wanted to destroy my life, then I would walk into that courtroom, prepared for everything, even if it meant exposing the darkest secret my family had ever hidden. The morning of the hearing, I arrived at the courthouse nearly an hour early, not because I was nervous, because I wanted to watch. I wanted to see who had chosen my son's side. As people began walking into the courtroom, I recognized familiar faces. Our family attorney, several senior employees from my company, even 2 of my closest friends. Almost every one of them avoided looking at me. The rumors had done exactly what my sons intended. To everyone else, I wasn't Richard Blackwood anymore. I was the old man who had supposedly lost his mind. 10 minutes before the hearing, my attorney leaned closer and whispered, "Richard, they're confident. They believe the judge will appoint temporary guardianship today." I simply smiled. Let them believe it. A few moments later, my sons walked into the courtroom wearing expensive tailored suits. Daniel barely glanced at me. Michael looked directly into my eyes and gave me a small, confident smile. Then he quietly said, "Dad, this doesn't have to be difficult. Just agree with the doctors, and we'll take care of everything. Take care of everything." Those 4 words told me exactly what they wanted. Not to protect me, to control me. I looked at him for several seconds before answering. "One day, you'll remember this moment for the rest of your life." His smile disappeared. For the first time that morning, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. Just then, the courtroom doors opened. All rise. Everyone stood as Judge Eleanor Whitmore entered the courtroom. She took her seat, looked down at the case file, then slowly raised her eyes toward me. This court will now hear the petition to appoint a legal guardian for Mr. Richard Blackwood. The hearing had officially begun, and my sons still believed everything was going exactly according to their plan. The judge looked down at the thick case file before her. Then she looked directly at me. "Mr. Blackwood, before we begin, I'd like to hear from your sons." Daniel stood first. His voice was calm, almost rehearsed. "Your Honor, this is the hardest thing I've ever had to do." He paused and lowered his head. "My father wasn't always like this. Over the last year, he's become forgetful. He signs documents he doesn't remember. He accuses people without evidence. We're only here because we love him." Several people in the courtroom nodded. It sounded convincing. Too convincing. Then Michael stood beside his brother. His performance was even better. "We don't want his money, Your Honor." He looked at me with fake sadness. "We just want our father to be safe. He doesn't understand how vulnerable he's become." The courtroom was completely silent. The judge wrote a few notes. Then she turned toward me. "Mr. Blackwood, you've heard your son's concerns. Would you like to respond?" I slowly stood up. Every eye in the courtroom was fixed on me. I could feel the reporters waiting for me to lose control. That was exactly what my sons wanted. If I became emotional, if I raised my voice, it would make their story look believable. So instead, I smiled, a small, calm smile. Then I looked directly at both of my sons. "Your Honor," I spoke quietly. "May I ask my sons just one question before I respond?" The judge looked surprised. She glanced at the attorney representing my sons. He nodded. "You may." I turned toward Daniel. There was only one question, one simple question, but I already knew it was about to crack their entire story wide open. I turned toward Daniel. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I asked, "Daniel, when was the last time you had dinner with me?" The courtroom went quiet. He frowned. "I'm not sure." I nodded. "What was the name of my family doctor before Dr. Collins?" Daniel looked confused. "I don't remember." I asked another question. "What medication do I take every morning?" Silence. Michael shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Daniel looked toward his attorney. The judge noticed I wasn't finished. I took one slow step forward. "My favorite restaurant? What do I order every single time?" Daniel swallowed hard. I don't know." I looked at the judge. "Your Honor, my sons are asking this court to take complete control of my life. They claim they know what's best for me, but they don't even know the simplest things about the man they're trying to protect." No one in the courtroom moved. Even the reporters had stopped writing. I continued. "They haven't had dinner with me in almost a year. They've never attended a single appointment with my physician. They've never asked what medications I take. They've never even called to ask how I was doing after my heart surgery." Both of my sons stared at the floor. Then I looked directly at Michael. "Tell the court, what day did your mother die?" His face turned pale. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. I closed my eyes for a moment. "My wife, the woman who raised both of you, passed away on October 18th. You missed her memorial because you were on vacation." The courtroom fell into complete silence. For the first time, the judge wasn't looking at me anymore. She was looking at my sons, and the confidence they had walked into court with was beginning to disappear. For several long seconds, no one said a word. Then my son's attorney quickly stood up. "Your Honor, with all due respect, these emotional questions have nothing to do with Mr. Blackwood's mental capacity." The judge looked at him, but didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned back to me. "Mr. Blackwood, do you have evidence that directly addresses the claims made against you?" I smiled. "Yes, Your Honor, I do." I reached into my coat pocket. Every person in the courtroom leaned forward. My sons did the same. They probably expected medical records, financial statements, or another speech. Instead, I slowly placed a small black USB drive on the evidence table. Daniel's face instantly lost its color. Michael stopped breathing for a second. Their attorney whispered, "What is that?" I looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor, everything my sons have told this court today can be answered by what's stored on this drive." The courtroom became so quiet, you could hear the air conditioner humming. The judge picked up the USB drive. What exactly does it contain, Mr. Blackwood? I took a deep breath. It contains security footage, financial records, and audio recordings. I paused, then looked straight at my sons. Recordings they never knew existed. Michael suddenly stood up. Objection! His voice cracked. Those recordings shouldn't be admitted without verification. For the first time that morning, he looked afraid. Not nervous, afraid. Because he knew exactly what those recordings contained. And deep inside, he realized something terrifying. Their perfect plan was beginning to fall apart. Michael's objection echoed across the courtroom. For the first time that morning, his voice wasn't confident. It was desperate. The judge calmly raised her hand. "Sit down, Mr. Blackwood." Michael slowly lowered himself into his chair. His hands were shaking. The judge turned to me. "Mr. Blackwood, before I admit this evidence, I need to know one thing. How did you obtain these recordings?" I nodded. "They came from my own office, Your Honor. I installed a security system after several confidential company files disappeared. I was never trying to record my sons. I was trying to protect my business." The judge looked toward my attorney. "Can you authenticate this evidence?" My attorney stood immediately. "Yes, Your Honor." The recordings were extracted by an independent digital forensic expert. The chain of custody is fully documented. The judge studied the paperwork for nearly a minute. The courtroom remained silent. Finally, she looked up. "The court will admit the evidence." Daniel closed his eyes. Michael whispered something to their attorney. The attorney's confident expression was gone. The courtroom technician inserted the USB drive into the evidence computer. A large screen lit up behind the judge. The first video appeared. It showed my office, the date, 6 months earlier. There I was, leaving the room after a board meeting. A few seconds later, Daniel quietly walked back inside. He looked over both shoulders, making sure no one was watching. Then he opened my desk drawer. Michael entered only moments later. He handed Daniel a folder. Neither of them knew. The security camera above the bookshelf had recorded everything. The entire courtroom watched in complete silence. Then, the video switched to the audio recording. Daniel's voice filled the courtroom. "Once the guardianship is approved, everything belongs to us." Michael laughed. "By the time Dad figures it out, it'll be too late." The silence that followed was louder than any argument. Even the judge stopped taking notes. She simply stared at the screen. And for the very first time, my sons realized their own voices had become the strongest witnesses against them. The courtroom remained frozen. No one spoke. No one moved. Daniel slowly lowered his head. Michael stared at the floor as if he couldn't believe what everyone had just heard. Then their attorney stood up. He forced a nervous smile. "Your Honor, a short audio clip doesn't tell the whole story. We don't know what happened before this conversation or after it. It's possible these statements have been misunderstood." The judge didn't respond. Instead, she looked at me. "Mr. Blackwood, is there anything else?" I nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, a lot more." I reached for another folder. Unlike the USB drive, this one was thick, nearly 200 pages. I placed it on the evidence table. My sons told this court they wanted to protect me, so I'd like the court to see what they were doing while they claimed they were protecting me. The judge opened the file. Inside were bank statements, property records, wire transfers, and dozens of invoices. Every page was highlighted, every transaction carefully organized. My attorney began speaking. "Your Honor, our forensic accountant traced more than $2 million from Mr. Blackwood's company into businesses secretly controlled by the petitioners." The judge looked up. "You have proof these companies belong to the petitioners?" "Yes." Corporate registration records, tax filings, and signed banking documents. Daniel suddenly stood up. "That's impossible." His attorney immediately pulled him back into his chair, but it was too late. His outburst echoed through the courtroom. The judge looked directly at him. "Mr. Blackwood, if you interrupt these proceedings again, I'll hold you in contempt Daniel's face turned bright red. He said nothing. Then the courtroom doors opened. Everyone turned around. A woman in her early 50s quietly walked inside. She carried a leather briefcase. She wasn't a lawyer. She wasn't a reporter. She was the company's chief financial officer, the woman who had worked beside me for 26 years. She walked to the witness stand, placed her hand on the Bible, and took the oath. Then she looked directly at the judge and said the words neither of my sons ever expected to hear. Your Honor, I was there the day they planned all of this. The courtroom fell into complete silence. Every eye was on Sarah Mitchell, the woman who had managed my company's finances for over 26 years. She wasn't family. She had nothing to gain. She simply swore to tell the truth. My sons looked at each other. For the first time that day, they looked genuinely frightened. The judge nodded. Ms. Mitchell, you may begin. Sarah took a slow breath. Your Honor, I knew Richard Blackwood long before his sons ever joined the company. I watched him build that business from a single pickup truck into one of the largest construction firms in the county. She paused. I also watched his sons slowly destroy everything he built. Daniel immediately shook his head. That's not true. His attorney whispered, Daniel, stop talking. Sarah continued. About 8 months ago, Mr. Blackwood asked me why our quarterly profits had suddenly dropped. I told him I didn't know, so we started checking every transaction together. She opened a folder. At first, we thought it was a bookkeeping mistake, but it wasn't. She held up several invoices. These companies didn't actually provide any services. They existed only to receive money. The judge leaned forward. And who approved those payments? Sarah didn't hesitate. She looked directly at Daniel, then at Michael. They did. The courtroom became silent again. One of the reporters quickly stood and rushed toward the hallway. Everyone knew this case had just become front-page news. Sarah wasn't finished. There was something even more disturbing. She reached into her briefcase and removed a handwritten notebook. I kept personal notes after every executive meeting. She slowly opened it. 3 months before today's hearing, I overheard Daniel saying something I'll never forget. The judge asked quietly, what exactly did he say? Sarah looked directly at my sons. Then, in a calm voice, she repeated every word. Once the court takes control away from Dad, we'll finally own everything. Neither Daniel nor Michael could deny it, because everyone in that courtroom could see the fear on their faces. And deep down, they knew the truth was only beginning to come out. Sarah slowly closed her notebook. The silence inside the courtroom was overwhelming. Daniel's attorney immediately stood. Your Honor, the witness is relying on personal notes, not an official transcript. We object. The judge looked at him without changing her expression. Objection noted. Then she turned back to Sarah. Do you have anything that supports your testimony? Sarah nodded. I do. She reached into her briefcase one last time and removed a company-issued tablet. I wasn't planning to bring this today, but after hearing what these two men said about Richard, I knew I couldn't stay silent. The courtroom technician connected the tablet to the courtroom display. A calendar appeared on the large screen. Sarah tapped one date, September 14th, an internal board meeting. The room's security recording began to play. There they were, Daniel, Michael, the company's attorney, and 3 board members. I wasn't in the room. The recording captured every word. Daniel leaned back in his chair and said, Dad still thinks he owns the company. Michael laughed. Not for much longer. Another board member looked uncomfortable. What if he refuses to sign? Daniel smiled. He won't have a choice. The attorney asked quietly, What exactly are you planning? Daniel answered without hesitation. We'll convince the court he can't manage his own affairs. Michael added, Once guardianship is approved, we'll sell the company before anyone realizes what happened. The video stopped. No one in the courtroom moved. Even the judge appeared stunned. One of the board members sitting in the gallery slowly lowered his head in shame. The judge folded her hands. Then she looked directly at Daniel. Mr. Blackwood, did you or did you not make these statements? Daniel opened his mouth, but nothing came out. For the first time in his life, he had no lie left to tell, and everyone in that courtroom knew. The case had just taken a devastating turn. Daniel's lips trembled. He looked at his attorney, searching for an answer, any answer. But the attorney remained silent. For the first time since the hearing began, even he knew the case was slipping away. The judge broke the silence. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm waiting." Daniel swallowed hard. "Your Honor, those recordings don't show the full context." The judge raised an eyebrow, then explained the context. Daniel hesitated. I was under a lot of pressure." Before he could continue, Michael suddenly stood up. "Daniel, stop talking." The courtroom froze. The judge looked directly at Michael. "Sit down." Michael slowly sat back in his chair. His face had turned pale. The judge folded her hands. It appears both petitioners are more interested in protecting themselves than answering the court's questions. Their attorney quickly stood. "Your Honor, my clients respectfully request a short recess." The judge considered it for a moment, then nodded. 15 minutes. The gavel struck. Court is in recess. The moment everyone stepped into the hallway, Daniel grabbed Michael by the arm. "What are we going to do?" Michael whispered nervously. "Keep denying everything." Daniel shook his head. "You heard the recordings. They have the bank records. They have Sarah. And now they have the board meeting." Michael looked around to make sure no one was listening. Then he said something that changed everything. "What if we offer Dad a deal?" Daniel stared at him. "What?" "If he agrees to drop everything, we'll give him part of the company back." Neither of them realized, just a few feet away, someone was standing behind the hallway corner, listening to every single word. It wasn't my attorney. It wasn't Sarah. It was Judge Whitmore's court bailiff, who had stepped out to call the courtroom back into session. He heard enough to understand exactly what my sons were trying to do. Without saying a word, he quietly walked back toward the courtroom. And a few minutes later, he placed a handwritten note on the judge's bench. Judge Whitmore read the note. Her expression changed instantly. She slowly looked toward my sons, then said 6 words that made the entire courtroom fall silent. "This hearing is no longer routine." The courtroom doors closed once again. Everyone returned to their seats. But something had changed. Judge Whitmore no longer looked at this case as a simple family dispute. She looked at it as something much more serious. She adjusted her glasses, then spoke in a calm but unmistakably firm voice. "Before we continue, the court has received information that may be relevant to these proceedings." Daniel's face turned pale. Michael slowly looked toward his attorney. None of them knew what the judge was referring to. The judge continued, "I'm giving both petitioners one final opportunity. If there is anything either of you wishes to correct, this is the time." The courtroom became perfectly silent. Daniel looked at Michael. Michael looked back. Neither of them spoke. The judge waited several seconds, then nodded. "So be it." She turned toward the court clerk. "Call the next witness." The courtroom doors opened. An elderly man wearing a dark blue maintenance uniform walked inside. Almost no one recognized him, except my sons. The moment they saw him, their expressions changed completely. It was Thomas Reed, the night security supervisor at our company's headquarters. He had worked there for nearly 30 years. He quietly took the oath, then sat in the witness chair. My attorney approached him. "Mr. Reed, were you on duty the evening of September 14th? "Yes." "Did you observe anything unusual that night?" Thomas nodded. "I did." He reached into his jacket pocket and placed a small notebook on the witness stand. "I keep a handwritten security log after every shift." He opened it carefully. At 9:47 p.m., I saw Daniel and Michael leave the executive conference room, carrying several boxes marked financial records. They told me Mr. Blackwood had authorized it. My attorney asked, "Did you verify that?" Thomas looked directly at me. The next morning, I asked Mr. Blackwood. He told me he had never given anyone permission to remove those files. A wave of whispers spread through the courtroom. Daniel immediately stood. "That's a lie!" Judge Whitmore struck the gavel. One more interruption, Mr. Blackwood, and I will hold you in contempt of court. Daniel slowly sat down. His breathing had become heavy. Thomas wasn't finished. He looked directly at the judge. Your Honor, there's one more thing. The security cameras recorded everything that night, and I brought a certified copy with me. The courtroom froze. Even the reporters stopped typing, because everyone knew if those security cameras showed exactly what Thomas claimed, then my son's entire case was about to collapse before the judge's eyes. The courtroom technician inserted the security footage into the evidence system. A large monitor flickered to life. The timestamp appeared. September 14th, 9:43 p.m. The hallway outside the executive conference room came into view. The entire courtroom watched in silence. A few seconds later, Daniel stepped into the frame. He looked left, then right, making sure no one was nearby. Moments later, Michael joined him. He was carrying two large archive boxes labeled Confidential Financial Records. Daniel unlocked my office door. The two brothers disappeared inside. Nearly 12 minutes passed. Then they walked out again. The boxes were gone. Instead, Daniel was holding a stack of freshly signed documents. Michael carried a portable document shredder. A murmur spread through the courtroom. The judge didn't say a word. She simply kept watching. The footage continued. The brothers entered the records room. Within seconds, sheets of paper began feeding into the shredder. Page after page, document after document. No one could hear the sound, but everyone knew exactly what was happening. Evidence was being destroyed. The video ended. The courtroom fell into absolute silence. Judge Whitmore slowly removed her glasses. She looked directly at Daniel. Did this footage accurately capture your actions that evening? Daniel's lips parted. No words came out. His attorney quietly stood. Your Honor, my clients invoked their constitutional right not to answer that question. The judge nodded slowly. That is your right. But the court may draw reasonable conclusions from the evidence presented. Michael buried his face in his hands. For the first time, neither brother looked confident. Neither looked angry. They looked defeated. Then my attorney stood one final time. Your Honor, the petition before this court claims that Mr. Richard Blackwood lacks the ability to manage his own affairs. He paused. The evidence has shown the exact opposite. It wasn't Mr. Blackwood who deceived his family. It was his family who tried to deceive this court. The judge looked down at the thick stack of evidence, then back at my sons. The expression on her face had completely changed. She wasn't deciding whether I needed a guardian anymore. She was deciding whether my own sons had committed fraud in her courtroom. And everyone inside that room already knew what was coming next. Judge Whitmore remained silent. She slowly closed the case file in front of her. Then she looked directly at Daniel and Michael. For the first time that day, there was disappointment in her eyes, not anger. Disappointment. She folded her hands. This court has listened carefully to every witness, reviewed every financial record, and examined every piece of evidence presented today. She paused. The silence was unbearable. Then she continued. The petition before this court asked me to determine whether Mr. Richard Blackwood is incapable of managing his own affairs. She looked at me. Mr. Blackwood answered every question clearly. He demonstrated a complete understanding of his finances. He presented organized evidence, and he conducted himself with remarkable composure throughout these proceedings. She turned toward my sons. Unfortunately, I cannot say the same about the petitioners. Daniel closed his eyes. Michael stared at the floor. The judge's voice became even firmer. This court finds absolutely no credible evidence that Richard Blackwood lacks the mental capacity to make his own decisions. A wave of whispers spread across the courtroom. My attorney quietly smiled. Sarah lowered her head with relief, but the judge wasn't finished. She picked up another document. Instead, the evidence presented today raises serious concerns that this guardianship petition may have been filed in bad faith. The courtroom became silent again. The judge continued. The recordings, the financial transfers, the witness testimony, and the surveillance footage suggest a deliberate attempt to obtain control over Mr. Blackwood's personal and financial assets. Daniel's attorney immediately stood. Your Honor, the judge interrupted him. Sit down, counsel. Her voice echoed through the courtroom. I am not finished. The attorney slowly sat back down. Judge Whitmore looked toward the court clerk. I am denying the petition for guardianship. Effective immediately, I closed my eyes. For the first time in months, I could finally breathe. But then, the judge spoke words no one in that courtroom expected. Furthermore, I am referring this entire matter to the district attorney's office for a criminal investigation into possible fraud, financial exploitation, perjury, and destruction of evidence. Daniel's face turned white. Michael whispered, No, this can't be happening. The judge struck her gavel. Court is adjourned. The sound echoed through the courtroom. But for my sons, their real nightmare had only just begun. The moment Judge Whitmore left the bench, the courtroom exploded into chaos. Reporters rushed toward the exit. Camera flashes lit up the room. Court officers quickly stepped between my sons and the crowd. Daniel looked completely lost. Michael grabbed his attorney by the arm. You told us we couldn't lose. The attorney pulled his arm away. I told you to tell me the truth. You never mentioned the recordings. You never mentioned the surveillance footage. You never mentioned the missing money. For the first time, neither of my sons had an answer. I quietly gathered my papers. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't celebrating, because no father dreams of defeating his own children in court. I would have traded every dollar I owned just to have my family back. But that family had disappeared long before this trial ever began. As I slowly walked toward the courtroom doors, someone called my name. Mr. Blackwood. I turned around. It was Judge Whitmore. She had stepped down from the bench and was standing in the private hallway. Her expression was softer now. May I speak with you for a moment? I nodded. She looked me straight in the eyes. In more than 20 years on this bench, I've seen families fight over money. I've seen brothers sue brothers. I've seen children abandon their parents. But I've rarely seen a case as heartbreaking as yours. I remained silent. She continued, You showed remarkable restraint today. Many people would have responded with anger. You responded with evidence. Then she said something I'll never forget. Mr. Blackwood, they tried to take your freedom, but they failed because you never gave up your dignity. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I simply thanked her and walked toward the courthouse exit. Outside, more than 30 reporters were waiting. The moment they saw me, microphones were raised. Mr. Blackwood, do you have a statement? Do you forgive your sons? Were they really trying to steal your company? I stopped on the courthouse steps, looked at the cameras, then gave only one answer. Money can build a business, but it can't build character. Without saying another word, I walked away. Behind me, my two sons were escorted out through a different exit, trying to hide their faces from every camera. But the story was only beginning, because within 48 hours, the district attorney's investigators would discover something even I never knew existed. 48 hours later, I received a phone call I wasn't expecting. It was Detective Laura Bennett from the district attorney's office. Her voice was calm. Mr. Blackwood, we've executed search warrants at your company. I think you should come down here. The moment I arrived, I knew something was different. The evidence room was filled with boxes, laptops, hard drives, financial records. Even the detective looked stunned. She placed a thick folder on the table. We thought this case was about guardianship. She paused. It isn't. I frowned. What do you mean? She slowly opened the folder. Inside were photographs of luxury homes, sports cars, private jet receipts, vacation villas in Europe. None of them belonged to me. Every single purchase had been paid for with company money. The detective looked directly at me. Your sons weren't stealing for months. They've been doing this for almost 4 years. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. 4 years. While I believed they were expanding the business, they had been quietly draining it. The detective continued. There's more. She pushed another document across the table. A property deed. I looked at the address. Then my heart stopped. It was my late wife's lake house, the home she loved more than anywhere else. The place where we celebrated every anniversary. The place where my grandchildren learned to fish. The detective spoke softly. Mr. Blackwood, this property was scheduled to be sold the day after your guardianship hearing. I stared at the document in disbelief. If the court had declared you legally incapable, they would have had the authority to sign the sale themselves. I slowly leaned back in my chair. Everything suddenly made sense. The hearing, the false accusations, the missing money. It had never been about protecting me. It had been about time. They needed the court's approval. Before I discovered the truth, Detective Bennett closed the file. There's one last thing you need to see. She placed a printed email in front of me. The sender was Michael. The recipient was Daniel. The subject line read, "After Dad's gone," I felt a chill run through my entire body. Because before I even opened the email, I knew whatever was written inside would be the final piece of the nightmare I had been living. My hands trembled as I unfolded the email. For a moment, I wasn't sure I wanted to read it. Detective Bennett quietly stepped back, giving me a moment alone. I took a deep breath and started reading. After Dad's gone, we'll merge his remaining shares into the holding company. Sell the lake house immediately. Liquidate the investment accounts before anyone asks questions. By then, no one will remember how we got here. I stopped reading, not because I had reached the end, because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My sons had already planned my life, as if I no longer existed. The detective gently asked, "Are you all right, Mr. Blackwood?" I looked at her. "I spent my whole life teaching my boys that your name is worth more than your money." I smiled sadly. I guess they only remembered the money. The detective remained silent. Then she slid one final document across the table. This was recovered from Daniel's laptop. I looked down. It was a draft contract. The title read, "Agreement for Sale of Blackwood Construction." The buyer's signature was already there. The purchase price, $48 million. The proposed closing date, the morning after the guardianship hearing. I closed my eyes. Everything fit together. If the judge had ruled against me, by the next morning, my company would have been sold. My wife's lake house would have been gone. My life savings would have been beyond my reach. And legally, there would have been almost nothing I could do. Detective Bennett quietly broke the silence. "Mr. Blackwood, we've decided to seek criminal charges. Fraud, financial exploitation, forgery, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice." I nodded slowly. There was no joy, no satisfaction, only sadness. Because no matter what happened next, those two defendants were still the little boys I once taught how to ride a bicycle. A week later, I received another call. This time, it wasn't from the detective. It was from Daniel. His voice was shaking for the first time in his life. My oldest son wasn't calling to argue. He was calling to beg. My phone rang just after sunset. The screen displayed a name I never expected to see again. Daniel. For several seconds, I just stared at it. Then I answered. Neither of us spoke. Finally, I heard his voice. It wasn't confident anymore. It wasn't arrogant. It was broken. "Dad, I'm sorry." I closed my eyes. Those were the words I had waited years to hear. But somehow, they didn't mean what they once would have. Daniel continued. "They've frozen our accounts. The company fired us. Michael's wife left with the kids and the district attorney. They're filing criminal charges." His voice cracked. "We've lost everything." I remained silent. Then he whispered the question he never thought he'd have to ask. "Can you help us?" For a moment, I remembered two little boys running into my arms after school. I remembered teaching them to fish at the lake house. I remembered telling my late wife, no matter what happens, our boys will always have us. Those memories still lived inside me, but so did the courtroom, the lies, the betrayal, the plan to erase me from my own life. I finally spoke. Daniel, you didn't lose everything this week. You lost everything the day you chose money over your family. He began crying. Dad, please, we made a terrible mistake. I know, I replied quietly, but every decision has a price. Another long silence filled the call. Then I said something I never imagined saying to my own son. The law will decide your future, not me. I ended the call, slowly placed the phone on the table, and looked out the window. The rain had finally stopped. The next morning, I drove to the lake house, the place my wife had loved more than anywhere else. I stood beside her favorite bench, holding a single white rose. For the first time in years, the silence felt peaceful. I placed the rose beside the lake, looked up at the sky, and smiled. Not because I had won, but because I had finally stopped fighting to keep people who had already chosen to leave. Over the following months, Blackwood Construction recovered. Every stolen dollar that could be recovered was returned to the company. I created a scholarship in my wife's name for children who had lost a parent. I transferred part of the company's ownership to the employees who had remained loyal through everything because they had proven something my own family had forgotten. Loyalty isn't inherited, it's earned. As for my sons, the courts would decide their punishment, but life had already taught them the lesson they refused to learn. You can steal someone's money. You can try to steal their reputation. You can even try to steal their future. But when the truth finally walks into the courtroom, no lie is powerful enough to stop it. And if there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that the people who betray you rarely expect you to survive. They never imagine you'll come back stronger